Abraham had Isaac, Isaac he had Jacob, Jacob he had Judah and his kin. Then Perez and Zerah came from Judah's woman Tamar. Perez he brought Hezron up, and then came Aram, then Amminadab, then Nahshon, who is then the dad of Salmon, who with Rahab fathered Boaz. Ruth she married Boaz, who had Obed, who had Jesse. Jesse he had David, who we know as king. David he had Solomon by dead Uriah's wife. Solomon, well, you all know him. He had good old Rehoboam, followed by Abijah, who had Asa. Asa had Jehoshaphat, had Joram, had Uzziah, who had Jotham, then Ahaz, then Hezekiah. Followed by Manasseh, who had Amon, who was Aman, who was father of a good boy named Josiah, who grandfathered Joachim, who caused the Babylonian captivity because he was a liar. Then he had Shealtiel, who begat Zerubbabel, who had Abiud, who had Eliakim. Eliakim had Azar, who had Zadok, who had Achim. Achim was the father of Eliab. Then he had Eleazar, who had Mathan, who had Jacob. Now listen very closely, I don't want to sing this twice. Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, the mother of Christ.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It is great to be with you this morning as we're in the second week of Advent. That was Matthew's begats. If you're familiar with the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew starts off his gospel, the good news of Jesus, by doing this giant lineage of talking about who Jesus is and where he came from, and this big genealogy that's there. And Christmas is one of those times where as families we gather together, like it or not, and because families are complicated, right? Yeah, you don't have to look very far in most of our lives to know that there are some pretty complex relationships that we have. They're rarely are they neat and tidy. There's often some kind of frustration with a different family member. And perhaps you know that Christmas is that one time where you're going to have to see your uncle, the one with the conspiracy theories, or the grandparent who is just so biting with their critique of you, how you dress, or that black sheep of the family who's going to be there, or maybe you're the black sheep of the family. You're just dreading going because it feels like everyone else has their life together and maybe you don't. And we just know that families are hard and they're dysfunctional. And we sometimes most of the time, we want to hide the details of our families and their dysfunction. We want to gloss over perhaps where we came from, maybe our family history or our heritage, or we want to hide something in our family tree. And so when he's documenting Jesus' lineage and all these people who were a part of it, you would think that if you're trying to share why Jesus and his birth is important, you try to hit the highlights, right? You try and hit the important ones because we want to bolster, where we came from. Some of us actually have last names that have a bit of clout, and maybe you are the recipient of people and their character that have set you up well for success. And so you kind of want to highlight them, and you maybe want to, diminish some of the others. But Matthew, as he's writing his gospel, he's primarily writing to Jewish people. And Jewish people really know their history. They know their lineage. They know the stories of how God had rescued them, how he had called them, and how God was their God, and he was God's people. And so they know all this. And so Matthew's trying to make an argument to this Jewish audience about why the birth of Jesus mattered, why the life of Jesus mattered, why his death, his resurrection, and his ascension mattered, and he's trying to give them clout, going like, let's go back, and I'm going to build a case for why Jesus is important. So he goes all the way back to Abraham and traces the history of marriages, of children through the line of King David, so that he can tie Jesus to being the promised king that's going to sit on David's throne forever, that was promised in like 2 Samuel 7. And so he's doing all of this arguing to like make it make sense to them. But if you were paying attention, and if you were reading or listening to that song, there's a couple anomalies in Matthew's lineage that he writes, his genealogy. Amongst all the regular people, which would be very important, like Abraham and King David, Josiah, some of the big, important, really good rulers of Israel, he has included the names of 5 women, which is unique because in a culture where they trace their lineage through the men, to include the wives is unique because each couple there, each father who fathers someone, there's also a woman who's a part of that story. But they aren't mentioned except for these 5 women. And so last week we had looked at Tamar, the forgotten, the first person who is in the genealogy that Matthew highlights. We wonder why would Matthew highlight these women when normally you'd kind of want to hide or like bolster, who your lineage is from? And so he highlights Tamar, who is someone who took matters in her own hands to keep herself alive and acted more honorably than Judah, who, he should have known and should have done better. And this week, we're looking at the next person who is in Jesus' lineage, Rahab. Rahab the Sinful. And so we had the passage read for us, which was so wonderfully done, thank you. And we have this context where the Israelites are moving into the promised land. They had been rescued out of slavery in Egypt. They had wandered around in the desert for 40 years. They are now on the cusp of entering into the promised land, and they have to drive out this really wicked people, the Canaanites who are there, and they're going to be able to settle in this land. And so they then send out Joshua, who's now the leader of the Israelites, sends out 2 spies to kind of case the joint and to find out what they are up against. So if you have your Bibles, you can keep it open in Joshua chapter 2. I think it's the 6th book of the Bible, so near the beginning. In Joshua chapter 2, it says, Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim, saying, "Go look over the land, especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Now, we don't know the motives for why they happened to enter the house of the prostitute. Perhaps Rahab's house would have given them the best cover for hiding, seeing that different men would probably or likely be coming and going from her house, and she might have a history there. The text doesn't imply that these men are there in any, sexual way, but it maybe, raises a couple of questions. Maybe it's just a good place to hide. But anyway, they go, and so then the king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent his message to Rahab, "Bring out the men who have come to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." Now, we have to maybe use a little bit of some imagination here, but if you were to put yourselves in Rahab's shoes, here is an opportunity for you to be the savior of your people, right? Everyone's scared. We know that because of the text that has been written. Everyone's scared about this upcoming invasion of the Israelites. And they know, the king knows that there's a couple spies there, and maybe if you're Rahab, who's known as the prostitute, this is an opportunity to maybe climb the rungs of the social ladder a little bit. I mean, you could snitch on these 2 spies, and you could be the one who goes down in history as the one who saved Jericho because we caught these men. Perhaps there's a reward for her. Perhaps she could be the hero. But that isn't what happened. Instead, as we've had read to us, she deceives the king by saying that these men, they've already gone. They came, they went, they're gone, they snuck out. And so she sends them on a misdirected search for these men in the wilderness. Now, what could cause her to throw away an opportunity for a promotion? the opportunity for a bit of recognition, a little bit of an opportunity for becoming great. Why would she give up almost a sure thing of being, the hero of her city for these two men, for these two spies who have come to actually case the joint because their plan is to destroy the whole thing? Well, let's keep on reading. We'll jump down to verse 8. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that Yahweh, the Lord, has given you this land, and there is great fear has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea. That's their exodus out of Egypt. And what you had done to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you've completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For Yahweh, your God, is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now, this is pretty fascinating. Here is Rahab, a Canaanite, pagan, prostitute, just made a confession of faith, right? She just made it. She says, I realize now, Yahweh, the God, your God, is God of heaven and on earth. He's better than all the other gods that we got around here. He is the God. She just made a confession of faith. And Rahab consents that the battle for Jericho and the land of Canaan belongs to Yahweh. Stories of Yahweh's deliverance from Israel, from Egypt, have come across the land, and they've caught about them crossing the Red Sea and the victories that they've already had with the other kings. And she has faith that Yahweh, the Lord, that he is going to continue to deliver Canaan into the hands of the Israelites. And so she responds by misdirecting her own people. All that she knows, she's not very, learned in who God is. Her theology is quite small. It's quite simple. She doesn't know it all. She doesn't know their history. She doesn't know all the rules they have to follow. She has very basic theology and so very small faith. All that she knows is that he is the true God of heaven and earth. And she places faith in Yahweh with minimal knowledge of him, with minimal understanding about him. Yet in the book of Hebrews, in the New Testament, there's this whole chapter 11 in Hebrews, which has been kind of called the Hall of Faith. And the Hall of Faith recounts these titans of faith in the past in Israel's life. And it starts recounting them and going down the list. And you know who's in the Hall of Faith? Is Rahab. It says, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. And by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Her little bit of faith, her small understanding about who God is, was enough that she is someone who is recognized hundreds of years after the fact and has become someone that the church pointed to, the early church pointed to, saying, now, she's got faith. Not only in Hebrews, but the book of James also highlights Rahab as someone with exemplary faith. James chapter 2, it says, in the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without a spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. She doesn't know much about Yahweh. Her theology, spotty at best. Yet, she believes and acts. She then strikes a deal with the spies. Your life for my life and my family. She has faith that Yahweh is the God of heaven and earth, and yet there's a little bit of doubt mixed in there, isn't there? Sometimes we think that the best faith is the faith that is just so certain. It is unshakable. In the face of all odds, we can, stand strong. And that is the best kind of faith. But if we're honest, very rarely do we actually get to live in that. My faith often is peppered with doubt. And hers is too. She's highlighted and held up as someone with exemplary faith, but she also has doubt. Please, 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 please promise you're going to save me, right? I confess all of this. I believe that God's going to turn over, but also please save me. I know Yahweh's powerful, but also please guarantee my safety. She's not sure what her fate is going to be, so she has this doubt mixed in. And so she actually says that in verse 12. She says, now then, please swear to me by Yahweh that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when Yahweh gives us this land. Isn't this an expression of faith too? The faith that's so mixed up with doubt? We can confess that Jesus is Lord, and yet we can still be filled with anxiety about all the unknowns and uncertainties that come our way. And we also want some reassurance too, right? Gotta profess, but also if you could kind of give me a sure sign that you could kind of like guarantee that I'm on the right track, that would be great. We bargain with God all the time in this way. We have this faith and it's mixed with doubt. We want some assurance. And usually if we're to highlight people and point to their upstanding character, we would want to highlight it, that would highlight our lives. We would gravitate to those people who are dripping with confidence and certainty. In fact, that might be why there's a thing that happens in the church, I find maybe today, where certainty is the biggest thing, and there's a gravitational pull to leaders who can come out and with certainty give you all the answers. They can give you all of the things about what you need to do and what you need to believe, have certain faith, and maybe it's because we have uncertainty that we want to maybe cling to the faith or the certainty of someone else. But we're never seeing that in Scripture. In fact, all the people who have faith is spotty at best. Jesus even says all it takes is the faith the size of the mustard seed. And most of us have that. It's filled with doubts at times, but that's the faith that we need. And so Matthew highlights these 5 women when he tells the story of Jesus, and none of them are perfect. None of them have it easy. None of them are holding positions of influence or authority. All of them are on the outside looking in on their social circles. And if I were to tell you the story of my family, there would be some branches I might misdirect you to look. Don't look over here. That's where the branches are all gnarled and twisted together. Don't look at there. There are messy relationships in my family. There's broken marriages in my family. There's stories of substance abuse, heartbreaking stories of physical and sexual abuse, stories of loss and grief, stories of estrangement and bitterness. And even if I were to pick and choose some of my family members to highlight as exemplary people of faith, I would be tempted to paint a rosier picture of them than what actually existed. You probably have the same kind of thing. So why would Matthew, again, choose these women? Why would he want to highlight them? It could be because their story is Matthew's story. Perhaps the reason behind it is that Matthew included these women because he sees himself in there too. Because labels have a tendency to stick to us, don't they? In fact, some of you might be still carrying a label that was attached to you from many years ago, and it feels like a millstone weight around your neck. Amanda the gossip, Kyle the cheat, Steve the drunk, Julie the liar, Michelle the slut, James the deadbeat, Billy the stoner, Rahab the prostitute. These labels and so many others can be attached to us, and they're the very things that keep us from feeling connected, included, loved. They're the things that divide us and separate us from community and from intimacy. And Matthew would have known this well too. For those of us familiar with Matthew's story, fill in his title for me. Matthew the tax collector. Now, tax collectors, even today, aren't necessarily highly esteemed, right? Matthew, no different. Matthew was a Jewish person at the time of Christ who's documenting the gospel of Jesus, working for, being paid by the occupying Roman Empire. They're in the land, they need to collect taxes. Matthew the Jew says, I'll do it. I will tax my own people and funnel their money to Rome to finance this Rome occupying army. Now, tax collectors weren't necessarily paid a salary. They had to make sure that they collected the right amount of tax, but the way that they got paid was inflating how much tax had to be collected, which meant you could extort your fellow countrymen by being able to bump up the amount, and as long as you gave Rome what they needed, you could skim a little off the top. It's a lucrative way of making tax, or making money. So as long as Matthew paid, he could charge whatever he wanted and keep the proceeds. He would have had to look his fellow Jews in the eye, the ones coming in from the sea with their fish, coming in and having to pay taxes on their catch. He would have to look at them in the eye and tax them. A traitor taking money from the Jewish people to fund the occupying army. He likely would have been cut off from many of his friends and family. And he likely would have found community with the other outsiders and outcasts. He wasn't Roman, he was Jewish, but he didn't fit in with the Jews, so who are you going to hang out with? Sure, the pay was pretty good, but at what cost? Yet when Matthew encountered Jesus, the labels, the past history, his character, all of his mistakes, and the compromises that he had made didn't seem to change how Jesus treated him. Let's read Jesus' encounter with him. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Jesus stopped. He looked at Matthew. He saw Matthew. He knew him. He knew what he was doing. He knew that he was an outsider, and he didn't dismiss him, didn't spit on him, didn't label him a traitor or a sellout. Instead, he says, "Come, follow me." So off they go. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Of course the tax collectors came out and eat. That's all who Matthew hung out with. Of course the other sinners showed up. Who are they going to hang out with? The righteous people? No, of course not. They all just hung out together and found community together, these broken, messy people. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with the tax collectors and sinners?" You can almost hear them spitting those words out. On hearing this, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Not only did Jesus invite Matthew to follow him, he went and ate with Matthew at his house with other sinners. And the righteous Pharisees could only be repulsed with what they saw. Matthew would then devote his whole life to following Jesus and the work of the kingdom, leaving behind a lucrative corporate job, but finding himself grafted into a family of faith, one that he saw small acts of faith be lived out in world-changing power. He saw people healed, he saw lives restored, he saw sins forgiven, and people granted new life. And not only did he experience this grace in his own life, he got a front row seat to seeing it happen in other people's lives again and again and again. Matthew, the tax collector, an unlikely person to be chosen by Jesus to be his disciple. In the same way that Rahab the prostitute was an unlikely savior to the spies and played a key role in Israel inheriting the promised land. She didn't have status, influence, power, or esteem, but she had faith, even the smallest bit. Faith that Yahweh was the God of heavens and earth, and that he could destroy or he could save. Her actions were based in faith. Well, the king of Jericho, the one who you'd think would be the hero of the story, the king of a big city, he did not see, he did not believe. Rahab is praised for her faith in Hebrews and James, for being someone who was willing to respond to what God was doing all around her. And while Rahab and all the other people listed in the Hall of Faith never got to see the fulfillment of the promise given to them. That's the beautiful thing. Read Hebrews chapter 11 over and over again. It's like they did this in faith and this in faith. And these people who acted in faith never got to see it come through fully. Yet they believed anyway. Matthew was someone who did. He got to see the fulfillment of the faith that Rahab had in God the Savior. He got to walk with him. He shared meals with him. He was the recipient of his friendship and the recipient of his grace. Matthew knew that Jesus was the one to come in fullness that Rahab only saw in shadow. When the siege of Jericho was over, Rahab and her family were spared. And this woman, who was a pagan Canaanite prostitute, was honored for her faith and incorporated into the family of Israel and became one of the grandmothers of Jesus. Joshua chapter 6. This is Joshua. This is just after the walls had fallen. And Joshua said to the two other men who had spied the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out, and all who belong with her, in accordance to the oath that you gave her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father, and her mother, and her brothers, and her sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men. Joshua had sent the spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. She wasn't just someone that was used in this case. She had maybe had the life of being someone who was used repeatedly. This was someone who had faith and acted, and her faith was then lifted up, and she was incorporated into the family. And the church now is that expression, where we get to come with the different labels that we've been given, with the different brokenness that we have, that we come with the title of sinner, just like Rahab, and yet there is a grafting in. She wasn't ethnically the same, and she was brought in. She wasn't even the same in religion, yet she was brought in through her faith. She was someone who was an outsider and became an insider, and someone who would then play an instrumental role through her marriage and children to become the grandmother of Christ. And Matthew had seen it, and he said, this is the good news. We got to tell her story, because her story is my story, is our story. And that we get to be people gathered together, professing who Jesus was and is to come. And pointing people saying there is hope to be found here, no matter the label that you're coming with. There is hope to be found here. There is grace to be found here. There is redemption to be found here. And for Matthew, he says, we got to celebrate these women. Rahab the prostitute, Matthew the tax collector. Fill in your own title. There is a space for you, that Jesus came in the fullness of God to be able to welcome you and bring you in. This is good news, church. Let me close in prayer for us, and we'll respond in worship as well. Heavenly Father, we come today with thankful hearts that you just deal so kindly and mercifully towards us. We thank you that you are so gentle towards us in our brokenness, that through your kindness you draw us to yourself. We thank you that you have grafted us into your family, this church. We thank you that we get to be a part of it even through the smallest bit of faith that we have. We profess you as Lord, and we ask you, come Lord Jesus. Help us to be a people who can remain focused on you. That in spite of the doubt that we feel, we can plant those seeds of faith, trusting that you are going to give growth. We pray all of this in your name, Jesus, and for your glory. Amen.